made this mess?
They did.
But they can't reach the chocolate. You must have got it for them.
I did, but I only ate one. They ate all the others.
But the mess is here now and it's not nice for everyone. So whose responsibility is it?
Actually, they're right. It is complex. Should the proponent be responsible for the fossil fuel they use themselves as well as the Scope 3 fuel they've sold to their customers, even if they're in other countries? Best practice, EIA, says they should be held responsible, as we're seeing internationally and recently in the Gloucester case. It must include a lifetime estimate of greenhouse gas emissions, including Scope 3 at every phase. The EPA of WA doesn't think so. Even though we have many offshore natural gas projects, the EPA doesn't consider Scope 3 emissions. The EPA's Environmental Factor Guideline for Greenhouse Gas Emissions states that emissions from a proposal will be assessed where they exceed 100,000 tonnes of Scope 1 emissions, which is the same threshold as the Australian government. Although the proponent does need to provide estimated emissions for all scopes and how they're likely to change over the life of the proposal, the Greenhouse Gas Management Plan only needs to outline intended reductions in Scope 1 over the life of the proposal and targets for Scope 1, but not Scope 3. What is best practice? The precautionary principle of do no harm and pursue sustainable development is the bare minimum requirement. The EPA has stated its objective to use its best endeavours to protect the environment and to prevent, control and abate pollution and environmental harm. They state that a lack of full scientific certainty is not a reason for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. Best practice is to assess early if a project is unlikely to decarbonise by 2050. The EPA Greenhouse Gas Emissions Guidance requires proponents of projects emitting large volumes to report against emission reduction targets, demonstrating their contribution to the goal of net zero. It considers proposals that would increase the state's emissions and contribute environmental harm based on this objective and the established link between emissions and climate change. So, is WA in line with our national climate plans? The WA government has committed to net zero by 2050 and to Australia's interim target of reducing emissions by 2030 in line with the Paris Agreement. The EIA process is aligned with best practice in this case. There is no room in the global carbon budget for new mining of fossil fuels, yet in WA proponents are still mining coal and extracting natural gas. WA's emissions policy states a considered and economically responsible approach. If emissions are to be displaced internationally, it is best practice to consider alternative technologies during mitigation to avoid or reduce emissions significantly, including a thorough detailed questioning of proposed net emissions against a checklist of criteria. The EPA feels that regulatory requirements in greenhouse gas mitigation have stimulated industry, technological innovation and adoption, not stifled it. Best practice assesses cumulative effects. The EIA process considers this to some extent. In the decision to assess, cumulative impacts are considered with other existing or foreseeable activities. The EPA report on assessment may include the cumulative impacts with other proposals and with itself. Currently, the EIA process focuses only on project-level assessments, and the EPA recommend the inclusion of a definition of cumulative, including successive, incremental and combined impacts from past, present and future. Unfortunately, kids, the current best practice EIA thinking falls short on what is really needed to address climate change in WA.